shall be God, and beside me there shall be no other.
Imagine this. It's the 1950s in the United States, and you belong to a marginalised community. You have no real rights, no real protection, and no voice that anyone in power wants to hear. You're insulted, ignored, and treated like a third-class citizen in your own country. Every door feels closed. Every system feels rigged against you. But one day, you hear a voice that sounds different.
You have never seen anyone resurrected before your eyes, and yet you have seen me do it repeatedly.
A white pastor stands at the pulpit, preaching something radical and maybe even dangerous. He says black and white are equal. He says God sees no colour.
God is perfect freedom, justice, equality, and thus the only thing that brings perfect justice, freedom, and equality, perfect love in all of its beauty and holiness is socialism. So
He says the world is broken, but together you can build something better.
Give that little sweetheart a little bit of love. Thank you, baby.
For the first time, someone in authority isn't talking about you, he's talking to you. You listen, and the more you listen, the more he feels like a messiah. You trust and obey him. Surrender your doubts, your money, and your identity to him. Even when he asks you to cross borders and follow him into a remote jungle, you don't question it. Why would you? After all, he's the only one who considers you human. But what you don't know is that this God-fearing pastor isn't your saviour. He's a psychotic tyrant who is quietly planning a brutal and excruciatingly painful death for you. This is the story of Jim Jones, a man who brainwashed 909 people into committing a horrid act and escaped it all without feeling a single second of their pain. Jim Jones was born James Warren Jones on May 13th, 1931, in the tiny rural community of Crete, Indiana, a place so small that many who knew him later spoke of his beginnings as revolutionary. But his early years were anything but ordinary. His father, James Thurman Jones, was a disabled World War I veteran who had been gassed in combat and was largely unable to work, leaving young Jim's family in deep economic struggle during the tail end of the Great Depression. His mother, Lynetta Jones, was forced to take on various odd jobs to keep the household going, and she often had to leave her son alone and emotionally unsupported. Jones' childhood lacked nurturing and affection, and this sense of abandonment shaped much of his later emotional and psychological makeup, which ultimately ruined thousands of lives. From an early age, Jones was drawn to religion and ideas of social justice. He attended church regularly as a boy, which was an uncommon habit during a time and place where many families barely had the means to survive. He was an avid reader, not just of the Bible, but of political thinkers and revolutionaries like Marx, Stalin, and Mayo. But he was fascinated less by their morality and more by their ability to influence and control masses. He wanted to be as big, if not bigger, as the people he read about, and he'd soon begin his own hunt for power. In the early 1950s, Jones became a student pastor at a small Methodist church in Indianapolis, with the main motive of reshaping what he felt was an evil world. But even contemporary churches didn't feel like home to him, because he wasn't looking to control a specific community or group. He wanted absolute control over everyone. So, when the church refused to allow him to racially integrate its congregation, he walked away and started his own independent ministry. In 1955, Jones founded what would later become the People's Temple, first named Community Unity Church, and soon after renamed the Wings of Deliverance, and then the People's Temple Full Gospel Church. Jones started out as a charismatic and compassionate preacher who championed racial equality and drew a diverse congregation, and his early appeals were genuine enough to attract followers.
We've seen Sister Brown here who was blind, totally healed. Saw one of our sisters blind from her childhood. Could be hysterical blindness, whatever. We're not concerned. She was blind and could not see. Now, I'm going to hold up some fingers. How many fingers? 3.
Jones focused on people often overlooked by society, including the poor, the elderly, and those who had little voice in the world.
Their sense of like real equality between people, not just racial, but just across the board, that was not a game. They were 100% serious about it.
If you had nothing, he gave you something in the form of food, shelter, guidance, and a place where your presence mattered. The gratitude you felt would have been immediate, but soon that thankfulness began to mix with dependence. You didn't just admire him, you relied on him and saw him as a protector, mentor, even prophet. Sharing your fears and secrets felt natural and even sacred because he made it seem like you were trusting someone who understood you. And when obedience began to feel like a spiritual duty, it didn't strike you as strange because you just wanted to be part of something bigger. By the early 1960s, the People's Temple was more than a church. It was a tight-knit social network, united not just by faith, but by dependence on Jones himself. These formative years set the blueprint for more extreme control techniques, and things were about to take a very dark turn. But why were so many drawn to him in the first place? Especially when there were so many different and dominant spiritual ideologies already existing. That's because Jones gave his followers what contemporary religions couldn't. One of the most striking things about Jones' early ministry was his radical push for racial integration, something almost unheard of when segregation ruled much of the United States. If you were attending his sermons, you would have immediately noticed people of all races worshipping, eating, and socializing together as equals. His promises weren't just words, they were a reality you could see, feel, and participate in. Jones knew that marginalized communities, especially black families facing systemic discrimination, were hungry for genuine acceptance and opportunity. By creating a church where racial identity was no barrier, he offered a tangible promise that in his place, everyone mattered. Over time, the People's Temple gained a reputation as a progressive haven and attracted followers from across social and racial lines. The congregation became known as the Rainbow Family, and in photos, sermons, and public appearances, Jones would show off this diverse community as a model for the world. You would have also felt proud and even protective if you were there, because knowing you were part of something so rare and powerful would feel surreal. The People's Temple, therefore, was a family that transcended racial divisions and was bound together by faith and shared purpose. Jones' convincing power was so overwhelming that even his critics felt he was a forward-thinking and moral, courageous leader. But even in this apparent inclusivity, Jones' control was growing at a dangerously rapid speed. By positioning himself as the orchestrator of his utopian vision, he made followers feel both gratitude and dependence. The Rainbow Family, while genuinely diverse and often supportive, also became the first environment in which Jones practiced psychological control through belonging. But too much control is never good, and it can turn even the Messiah into a power-hungry devil. By the late 1960s, Jim Jones had transformed the People's Temple from an independent church into a politically influential organisation in California. His message was a mix of Christian theology and socialist ideals, and it created a philosophy often described as apostolic socialism. Listening to him, it would feel like you were part of something larger than yourself, something that could actually change the world. You'd be drawn in, especially if you came from a working class background or felt ignored by the system. You'd find purpose in volunteering, helping the hungry, caring for the elderly, or joining voter drives. Every act of service made you feel needed, valued, and morally righteous. This was because Jones' approach was more than spiritual. It was strategic, because he was just as active in politics as he was in social welfare. With his influence growing over people, Jones multiplied his power by forging relationships with prominent politicians, including mayors and legislators, who appreciated his ability to mobilise voters and deliver support from the temple's growing congregation. Behind the scenes, however, this political engagement also served Jones' personal control. By intertwining his ministry with politics, he created layers of protection against scrutiny. Politicians often hesitated to criticise him as they feared backlash from a vocal, organised, and diverse congregation. Meanwhile, followers were taught that loyalty to Jones was a form of civic and spiritual duty. Apostolic socialism also allowed Jones to frame dissent or criticism as not only disloyal to him, but morally wrong and socially destructive. If you questioned the temple or its leader, you'd be framed as opposing social justice itself. In this way, political engagement and ideological messaging mixed into a powerful tool of psychological control, and all of its extended Jones's influence beyond sermons and services into the broader social and political sphere. With a high approval rate and little scrutiny, Jones felt more arrogant by the day, so much so that he started going against everything he campaigned for. He was no longer a preacher, he was now a tyrant. And here's what happened next. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, reports of psychological, emotional, and even physical abuse began surfacing from the People's Temple. Inside the church, followers were often subjected to intense scrutiny and public humiliation. The moment you shared anything about your personal life in confession sessions, which were initially framed as spiritual exercises, you were shamed so it'd be easier to control you. If you didn't want to share, you were pressured to reveal personal failures, doubts, or criticisms of the temple in front of the congregation. Any hesitation or perceived resistance could result in verbal attacks, ostracism, or even forced labour, meaning that saying no was not an option anymore. With the passage of time, Jones' evil practices created an environment where members policed themselves, internalising guilt and fear as mechanisms of control. Around this time, former members also began noticing a disturbing change in Jones himself. He increasingly relied on prescription drugs, including amphetamines, sedatives, and tranquilizers, and often appeared medicated during sermons and private meetings. Followers described his behaviour as erratic, with his speech slurred, his moods volatile, and his paranoia growing by the day. What had once felt like calculated manipulation now seemed fueled by chemical dependence, and somewhere along the lines, he lost control and started abusing people he once claimed to protect. But the abuse wasn't entirely mental. If you were vulnerable, you might feel the unspoken threat of sexual coercion. Money was another trap, as you would be encouraged or subtly pressured to give up significant portions of your income, all in the name of charity and communal living. Meanwhile, Jones lived in comfort, with private rooms and amenities far beyond what you had, and that created a visible divide between his promises and reality. All of this raised several red flags, and so external scrutiny began as journalists, former members, and concerned relatives noted discrepancies between Jones' public persona and the reality within the temple.
Why? Because when you live for truth, you'll be persecuted. And if you're not getting persecuted, you're not living the just life. You're not in the body of Christ, the body of this revolution.
As Jones ran his school of lies with impunity, complaints about abuse, exploitation, and manipulation slowly made their way into the media and attracted attention from local authorities. Unfortunately, Jones had already entrenched loyalty and fear so deeply among his followers that many dismissed or denied these claims. They were convinced that outsiders did not understand the temple's higher purpose, and they were trying to corrupt a perfect world. Jones himself claimed that he was being wrongfully targeted for preaching God's word.
Do that to you, my. Do you need to ask why they do that to me? They that live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. They shall revile you. They shall say all manner of things falsely against you. They shall do unto them everything that they wish to do, and even kill you, thinking they do God a service. And if you're not getting persecution, you're not living godly. So I have my credentials. What about you?
These early reports of abuse were the first warning signs of the extreme control Jones would later exert in Jonestown, where Jones would show his true colours, and things were about to get really ugly for his followers. By the early 1970s, Jim Jones had built a substantial following in California, particularly in San Francisco, where the People's Temple had become a politically influential institution. But with the increased limelight came more scrutiny, and Jones' control over his congregation required a new strategy: isolation. In 1974, Jones spearheaded a massive relocation of his followers to a remote region in northwestern Guyana, South America. The settlement, later known as Jonestown, was a pitch of socialist utopia, a place where his followers could live free from oppression, racism, and the corruption of the outside world. But it also proved to be the end game. For Jones, the relocation was a psychological masterstroke. By moving his congregation thousands of miles away, he could control information, environment, and social structures and ensure that loyalty to him would remain absolute. Jones sold the move as an opportunity for his followers to live in a paradise aligned with their ideals. He promised fertile land, communal living, and a society built on equality and cooperation. But once you arrived, the paradise began to feel different. The jungle was isolating, miles away from the world you knew. From food, healthcare, and safety, you had to depend on Jones for everything. You couldn't just walk away. Your friends and family were far, and your entire life was now under the watch of a man who was under the influence of drugs and hallucinating more often than not. In Jonestown, Jones' drug use intensified alongside his isolation. He was frequently under the influence while delivering hours-long loudspeaker sermons, rambling about government conspiracies, assassination plots, and imagined enemies closing in. Nobody now knew whether it was deliberate manipulation or genuine delusion. Even during the relocation, Jones employed a mix of propaganda, persuasion, and emotional manipulation, as followers were constantly reminded of threats from government agencies and hostile media. You're told that leaving or dissenting was not just dangerous, but morally wrong. One of the most chilling tools Jim Jones used to maintain control over his followers was the series of events known as White Nights. Now, while some of these events also happened in California, the ones in Guyana were all about shielding Jones from the fate he truly deserved: a life behind bars. The White Nights were not ordinary gatherings or religious ceremonies. They were staged emergency drills designed to test loyalty, instill fear, and normalise obedience to extreme directives. Jones would announce that the temple or the community was under attack. Maybe the government was coming. Maybe traitors were lurking within. You didn't know what was real, and neither did anyone else. It didn't take long for panic to spread like wildfire, because Jones made it feel immediate, urgent, and deadly. Sometimes there were staged attacks or fake evidence, just enough to make your heart pound and your mind spin. In extreme cases, you are asked to participate in drills simulating mass suicide, emergency evacuations, or extreme acts of loyalty. You were told to act as if your life and the lives of everyone you love depended on obeying every order, including evacuations, extreme loyalty tests, and even simulated mass suicide. At first, it felt surreal, but with each exercise, it became a little more real and a lot more terrifying. Each time, you followed because there was no other option. The more you trained, the less you questioned each scenario, and the more willing you became to follow orders unquestioningly, even when they involved life or death decisions. White Nights also reinforce social pressure and dependency. Members observe peers complying, often cheering or emotionally supporting each other in acts of simulated devotion. If you resisted or hesitated, you were met with guilt or isolation, or, in the worst case scenario, you were labelled a traitor. Either way, you were doomed. Within no time, followers began policing themselves and internalising the idea that loyalty and survival were inseparable. In short, Jones used White Nights to erode moral boundaries. By repeatedly confronting his followers with scenarios that violated natural instincts and ethical norms, he rewired their understanding of right and wrong, and that eventually led to a few murders that marked the beginning of Jones's end. As reports of abuse and human rights violation in Jonestown reached the media, US authorities decided to formally investigate the temple in November 1978. Congressman Leo Ryan, a California representative, led a delegation to the remote Guyanese settlement, accompanied by journalists and concerned relatives of People's Temple members. The visit was intended as a fact-finding mission, which was tasked to witness conditions firsthand and, if necessary, facilitate the safe return of members who wished to leave. The delegation was greeted cordially as Jones appeared cooperative at first. He even hosted meetings and guided tours, presenting the settlement as a thriving and harmonious community. But when several members quietly expressed the desire to leave, Jones orchestrated a carefully planned response. As the delegation prepared to depart with defecting members on November 18, 1978, Jones ordered armed temple members to intercept them at the nearby airstrip. Jones' followers did as ordered, and Congressman Ryan and 4 others were mercilessly gunned down, while several more were wounded. The killing of Congressman Ryan proved what people had been wondering. The People's Temple was a dangerous cult that needed to be dealt with. It also shattered any illusion that Jonestown could remain a peaceful commune. And for the residents, it was a terrifying confirmation that defiance or escape could be fatal. The murder was not a spontaneous act of rage. It was a deadly manifestation of the control Jones had cultivated over years. It revealed the lengths to which he would go to protect his power and enforce obedience. But if you think the killing of Congressman Ryan was shocking, you'll be completely horrified with what's going to happen next. But before we find out why, if you haven't already, please pound that subscribe button. It's completely free and it'll prevent scammers from robbing you of your entire life savings. So please, do yourself a favour, subscribe or be scammed. Following the murder of Congressman Leo Ryan and his delegation, Jim Jones orchestrated a mass killing of his followers, an event that would claim over 909 lives, including children.
Whatever they were telling him, and a lot of the children were crying, and he was telling them not to tell the children that they were dying, not to tell them it was painful. He was telling people it wasn't painful and that, people had to die with dignity.
Jones had spent years conditioning his followers through fear, isolation, and psychological manipulation. White knights had desensitized them to the idea of death and created a terrifying familiarity with extreme obedience. Now, it was time to put it to the test.
We've lived as no other people have lived and loved. We've had as much of this world as you're going to get. Let's just be done with it. Let's be done with the agony of it.
Imagine if you're one of those few hundred unfortunate victims. You hear the loudspeaker crackle, and it's Jones's voice. He tells you that the outside world is coming for all of you.
Be here, I tell you, get moving, get moving, get moving. Don't be afraid to die. If these people land out here, they'll torture some of our children here. They'll torture our people. They'll torture our seniors. We cannot have this.
He says that leaving, defying him, or questioning him isn't just dangerous, it's betrayal.
If we can't live in peace, then let's die in peace. We've been so betrayed. We have been so terribly betrayed.
You glance around at the others. Their faces are pale, eyes wide, some shaking, while others quietly sobbing. Then he presents the solution in the form of a grape-flavored poison.
Death is, I tell you, I don't care how many screams you hear, I don't care how many anguished cries. Death is a million times preferable to 10 more days of this life.
He tells you it's an act of loyalty, a revolutionary statement, and the final step towards salvation. Your hands tremble as it's handed to you. Some of you drink immediately, driven by fear or faith. Others hesitate and draw the guards' attention. Whether willingly or by force, all of you drink the poison. Within minutes, 909 of you vanish on the orders of the man who you loved more than anything else in the world. But along with those 909 deaths, Jones' empire was buried too. When the mass murder-suicide at Jonestown was over, Jim Jones was found dead near his throne-like chair with a gunshot wound to the head. Unlike more than 900 followers, Jones did not die from cyanide poisoning, and that was self-explanatory. Jones had spent years glorifying what he called revolutionary suicide. But when the moment came, he chose a quicker and less painful death for himself. Whether the gunshot was self-inflicted or carried out by a close aide at his direction, it was clear that Jones did not want to die the same way his followers did. Even in death, he separated himself from them. He wanted to be different and held in a higher regard. If anything, his choice stripped away the last bit of illusion. The man who preached equality, sacrifice, and shared suffering ensured that he would not endure the terror he imposed on others. In the aftermath of one of the most terrifying mass suicides in history, the People's Temple collapsed almost instantly. Most of the survivors were arrested, questioned, and eventually released, and many left traumatized and stigmatized for life. The organization's assets were seized or dissolved, and its name became synonymous with fanaticism. The Jonestown Massacre was the definitive end of the People's Temple, but it was not the end of power-hungry individuals manipulating innocent people. Even today, religion continues to be used as a tool for control by figures disturbingly similar to Jim Jones. But religion isn't the only weapon. As society is modernised, new methods of exploitation have emerged, and today, scams, financial deception, and false promises of wealth have replaced pulpits and sermons. Satish Kumbani's BitConnect scam was one of the most devastating examples of this modern manipulation. He presented himself as a crypto visionary, promised life-changing wealth, and ultimately robbed his victims of everything. Click the link above to watch the full story of this Indian con artist and how history keeps repeating itself, just with different tools.